Love triangles. Whether you love or hate them, they are a staple in fiction. Few are more iconic, however, than Bella's triangle with a vampire and a werewolf, and Elena's with two vampire brothers. Both of these have been talked about at length pretty much anywhere Twilight and the Vampire Diaries have been discussed. But not many people have tried to directly compare the two. You know, because that's an insane task with so many layers. I like taking on challenges no one else will on this channel though, so comparing these two triangles is what we're going to attempt to do in this video. Hello everyone and welcome to the Reulerverse. I'm Renee Rule, an author who does writing commentary and tells otherworldly stories, and thank you so much for 5,000 subscribers. This is my very first subscriber special. Hope you all enjoy it. For those of you who don't know or are less familiar with Twilight and the Vampire Diaries, Twilight is an extremely famous movie series based on books by Stephanie Meyers, while the Vampire Diaries is another extremely popular TV show by the CW and based on books by L.J. Smith. Looking between the two series, there's no denying that they are extremely similar to each other, especially with their characters. That's why I do these comparison videos. Not to mention, I like to see who comes on top when I compare characters from similar franchises. So, with that background information out of the way, let's get to the meat of this video. You've seen Bella versus Elena. We even did Edward versus Stefan. But what about the full love triangles? Who will come out on top, and who will go down as one of the worst fictional love triangles in history? Let's find out. The Twilight love triangle. We'll start with the more well-known love triangle, I'd say. My gosh, where do I even begin with Twilight? There are so many issues with it. From the uneven presentation of the love interests, to their problematic behavior that is never really fully addressed. Believe it or not though, there are a lot of good and fun aspects to this triangle. So let's start with what works. First of all, I love the dichotomy of these two love interests. The idea of one being a vampire and the other a werewolf, natural enemies of each other, was genius. Vampires eat humans, werewolves hunt vampires. None of them trust each other. The drama practically writes itself. Most of the few interactions Edward and Jacob had with each other were rife with tension, and not just because they both liked Bella, but because they both thought the other was too dangerous for her. Edward did not want Bella to be involved with a clan of men who turn into unaliving machines, and Jacob did not want Bella to be near a family of immortals who need blood to survive. Meanwhile, Bella was caught in the middle, wanting so desperately for her boyfriend and childhood friend to get along. And to point out specific traits I liked about each man, I enjoyed how protective Edward was of Bella. Not the parts that were controlling, but the wholesome parts who saw her as his light, his salvation. When the evil vampire showed up in the first book, or movie, depending on what you've seen, Edward immediately put himself between them and Bella. When the Volturi tried to test a psychic attack on Bella, he jumped in front of her without hesitation, taking an attack that he knew would cause unbearable pain. Despite their issues, you cannot deny that Edward was dedicated to Bella body and soul. I also love the emphasis on taking things slow in their relationship. Twilight has Christian roots, so this couple taking their time getting physical and waiting for intimacy until marriage is certainly part of that. But as Cinema Therapy said in their video on Twilight, great video by the way, you should watch it, the message this sends is very positive. Bella, at least in the books, is eager to move forward with Edward, basically being down for anything, and Edward is constantly reminding her to slow down. He gives Bella time to think about if this relationship is what she really wants, and he is very clear on the danger she could be in if she chooses to stay with him. Honestly, for a couple considered the worst in fiction, their communication really isn't that bad. Which is why when I watched Twilight for the first time, I was Team Edward. As for Jacob, I also enjoyed how protective he was toward Bella, to a lesser extent than Edward though. While Edward's protection of Bella came from genuine care for her well-being, Jacob's came off as transactional. Sure, in the beginning when they started hanging out, Jacob was worried about Bella's declining mental state from her breakup. They bonded over fixing up his motorcycle and returned to the dynamic they had as childhood friends. I liked those moments, but as the relationship developed, it seemed Jacob was hanging out with Bella less out of concern and more because he thought he was better than her ex-boyfriend. Jacob wanted desperately for her not to go back to Edward.
This is getting into negative territory though, which we'll talk about soon. Another moment I liked was when Jacob's pack saved Bella from the evil vampire. That was a great setup for the werewolf plot later. I also enjoyed how dumbfounded Bella was when she found out about him and when she met the Colette tribe. The werewolves were very interesting. I just wish her relationship with Jacob and the wolves was explored more.
But that is it for the positive aspects of this triangle. It's very clear what the author's intentions were for Edward and Jacob, for them to be two special supernaturals fighting over an ordinary girl, who loves them both in different ways and just wants everyone to get along. It's a great foundation, but unfortunately in execution there were a lot of unintentional consequences.
I'll start with this. Despite the marketing and fandom acting like the Twilight love triangle was peak drama, that Edward and Jacob were neck and neck in the competition for Bella's heart, where people took sides and argued on hundreds of forums who was best for Bella, and it could be anyone's game, it was obvious who was going to win. Honestly, I'm baffled that when people talk about love triangles that the Twilight one is the first one people think about. Because when you actually look at the story, this hardly even counts as a love triangle. Bella dated Edward, they broke up, and Jacob was the only friend Bella was able to confide in. Yes, Jacob did quickly develop feelings for her, but Bella never, and I mean never, felt the same way. Not even a little bit. In a typical love triangle, the person in the center is normally torn between her two options, weighing their pros and cons and hesitant to pick one or the other because she doesn't want to break either of their hearts. Because she has feelings for both of them. In Twilight, this is not the case at all. The second Edward came back into the picture, Bella jumped into his arms without hesitation. There was no conflict, no mystery of who she'd pick. Bella was so attached to Edward that she'd take him back no matter what he did. She was a ride or die. Jacob was doomed to lose from the very beginning. So that's the first problem with this love triangle. It's not even a triangle, it's more like a couple with massive problems and a childhood friend who's trying to insert himself into that drama. And I think that was supposed to be the intention? When Stephanie Meyer was writing Twilight, I don't think she was expecting it to blow up as much as it did, and she especially didn't expect people to get so attached to the love triangle, otherwise she would have put more effort into it. Jacob was never Edward's competition, he was just an obstacle in the way.
But in the end, whether or not this was an actual love triangle really isn't that relevant. I mean, it is to me. I love to obsess over the technical side of things all day long. I love to be super logical. But at the end of the day, what most people really care about is Bella's relationship with each man, whether or not those relationships made sense, and most of all, how problematic they were.
For the negative side of this triangle, we'll start with Edward. You know how I say he's dedicated to Bella body and soul? Yeah, that's cute and all, until you realize how far it's taken. Edward and Bella's relationship starts with Bella walking into her new science class and Edward getting a whiff of her scent. For some reason, she smells better to him than other humans. So good, in fact, that he cannot stop fantasizing about getting her alone so he can unalive her. Understandably, he tries to avoid her because of this reason, but then he realizes something else. He also cannot read her mind. Edward has the ability to read all human minds, except Bella's. Wondering what makes Bella different than everyone else, he does start talking to her. This quickly turns into stalking and then full-blown obsession. He learns everything about Bella, from her family to her daily schedule, even going so far as to watch her sleep at night. Yes, he breaks into her bedroom regularly and watches her sleep. His whole life, 24 hours of every day, becomes about her. He cannot stop thinking about getting closer to Bella, and luckily for him, she feels the same way. Now, this is where things get a bit morally ambiguous, in my opinion, because yes, Edward did stalk her, and yes, stalking is indeed bad. But the strange part is Bella is okay with it? Yeah. Edward is pretty upfront about his behavior from the start. She learns about his deep need to unalive her and his obsession, and she doesn't mind. In fact, I'd say Bella's into it, at least from what I remember in the books. She felt safe knowing he was watching her at night, like a sort of dark guardian angel. So I suppose my question to you guys is this okay, or at least better, if Bella is into it? After all, some couples do crazy things, but if they're both consenting, most people don't find that problematic. I don't think that's an easy question to answer, so I'm going to leave it up to you guys.
There are other negative aspects to their relationship, though, ones that are not as morally questionable. The most prominent one is their age difference.
With that, I'm going to say something that might contradict my earlier statement. Edward's behavior, in context, becomes much darker when you consider the fact that Bella is 17 and Edward is 104 years old. Bella is a teenager on the cusp of becoming an adult, and Edward has lived not one, but multiple lives over the course of his immortal existence. Bella barely understands the concept of a future and a career, so how can she understand what's going on between her and Edward? As she gets older, she could grow to resent him for what he did, realizing the moral implications of it way too late. Again, it is interesting though, because this is brought up in the books. Edward does tell Bella not to make any rash decisions, as she is young and deserves to live her life, but she doesn't listen. I'm not saying that justifies it, as this age gap is still super creepy, and Edward definitely should have left her alone. He should not have gotten with a teenager, even if she did want to get with him, but it's not quite as bad as many commentators on YouTube might like you to believe. Trust me when I say, I've seen so much worse in romance. At least these two talk about their problems. The red flags don't end there though, no. Other massive red flags in this relationship include Edward's mental state. He's clearly unwell and clinging to Bella as a coping mechanism. In real life, this would most certainly end with one of them, most likely Bella, dead, so they're lucky it worked out. There's also the fact that Edward kept secrets from her, including the massive one that he used to be a serial unaliver, until after they were married. Not to mention that after she gets with Edward, Bella disregards everyone else in her life. Her dad, her friends, anyone who questioned her relationship with Edward was someone Bella ultimately chose to distance herself from. She ruthlessly cuts off her support system to focus on this codependent, age-inappropriate, and extremely dangerous relationship. You could argue that she becomes worse after meeting Edward, not better. Bella wanted so badly to be a vampire that she neglected everything else, so despite the fact that some things aren't as bad as people say, this is still far from a good relationship.
Enough about Edward though. You get it, he has plenty of problems. But what about Jacob? Surely Bella's childhood friend, who's around the same age as her and cares for her well-being, would be the obvious better choice. And, well, despite that, there's still a reason why I was Team Edward.
The problem with Jacob, and the reason many fans turned on him, was the way he treated Bella. In contrast to Edward's caution, Jacob rushed into a relationship with Bella and did not consider her feelings at all. As I said in my Jacob video, he was a nice guy, a guy who is kind to a woman because he wants to be with her, and if she rejects him, he gets angry. Jacob expects that being nice to Bella and telling her how bad vampires are will be enough for her to be with him. And when she doesn't choose him, he straight up tries to force himself on her. Understandably, Bella slaps him for this, and Edward nearly unalives him. Not to mention the baby incident. Honestly, I'm not even going to touch on the imprinting plot in this video. I covered that plenty in the Jacob video. We all know why that was bad. My point is, while Edward's character had some strengths, a few reasons we might root for him to be with Bella, Jacob had none, other than moral ones, such as him not wanting Bella to die. The rest of his character was a disaster. It felt more like he wanted to possess Bella than be with her, and that contributed massively to this mess of a love triangle.
And that's what I have to say about the Twilight love triangle. It's not good. Most fictional love triangles are better. However, the Vampire Diaries? Yikes. It's also extremely problematic, but in different ways. Let's talk about it.
The Vampire Diaries love triangle.
Oh man, the Vampire Diaries. Honestly, you'd think with how much more time the writers had to develop these characters than Twilight, that this love triangle would be better by leaps and bounds. But, well, another creator put it better than me.
I can't remember who said it first, but someone mentioned that the Vampire Diaries is, quote, a high school girl who falls in love with two serial unalivers. And they're not former unalivers like Edward, who hasn't ended anyone's life in decades, No. Both Stefan and Damon take people out on a regular basis. And they are both age inappropriate for Elena. Just like with Twilight though, we'll start with Stefan and Damon's positives. First of all, I adore their dynamic. Unlike Edward and Jacob, who are enemies the whole time, Stefan and Damon are estranged brothers turned enemies. But then they learn what it means to be family and decide to support each other no matter what. The actors who play them have amazing chemistry, and I lost myself in the fantasy of who they used to be and who they became. Their time in 1864 with Catherine, their tragic turning into vampires, and their need to find themselves ever since. Some of the best moments of the show were when we got Stefan and Damon's backstory, when they worked together to save Elena, and the storyline centered around their brotherhood. All of it was so fun to watch, and super satisfying. I liked how Stefan started off as the good vampire who only drank animal blood, how, like Edward, he gave Elena a choice in whether she wanted him in her life and treated her kindly. When Elena found out Stefan was a vampire and freaked out, he gave her space to process what happened. It was heartwarming to see how protective Stefan was of Elena, how he too would sacrifice his life for her. Their relationship represented Stefan reconnecting to his humanity, and, in my opinion, Stefan was much less problematic in the beginning of the Vampire Diaries than Edward was in the beginning of Twilight. Stefan seemed, at least on the surface, more mentally stable and safer for Elena to be around. He never once fantasized about hurting her, at least not to our knowledge. All Stefan wanted to do was protect her. I also enjoyed the dynamic Elena had with Damon. Even though he was an antagonist in the beginning, the two of them had undeniable chemistry. Damon was fascinated by Elena's spunky attitude and lack of fear when she confronted him. This resulted in him going from wanting to use Elena to get to his brother to falling in love with her. Watching Damon's face soften when he saw Elena, even when he was doing terrible things, was wholesome and addictive. When I first watched the Vampire Diaries, I was on the edge of my seat wondering what would happen between them next. However, if you read between the lines even a little teensy bit on this relationship, that fantasy falls apart. For all the positives of Stefan and Damon, there are twice as many negatives. We'll start with Stefan. Stefan is good and kind, yes, but he has several Edward-like tendencies. First of all, his age gap with Elena is almost exactly the same. Well, not almost exactly, there's about a 60-year difference. But honestly, what even really is the difference between 100 and 160? Elena is 17 at the start of the show, while Stefan is 163. Like Edward, Stefan is frozen at 17 years old, but that doesn't make it better. Stefan has the experience of multiple of Elena's lives, and the fact that he likes someone as young and immature as her is creepy.
Although I must say, it is made more palatable by the fact that all the actors who play these teenage characters are in their mid-20s. If you ignore the high school setting, you can easily convince yourself that everyone involved in the Vampire Diaries is a consenting adult. Seriously, how hard is it to make your main characters adults? Geez, if Elena was in college, I would not be complaining about the age gap nearly as much. Same for Bella. Why pick high school for vampire romance?
And also, why make the vampires hundreds of years old if you're going to pick high school for vampire romance? I will never understand that. But back to Stefan's red flags. Just like Edward, he can also be seen watching Elena while she sleeps, although to my memory this only happens once, so I cannot confirm whether or not that's a regular thing. Still creepy though, especially since unlike Bella and Edward, Elena and Stefan never talk about this behavior. It's also not cool that Stefan kept his Ripper past a secret from Elena. When starting this relationship, it's important to let your girlfriend know that you used to unalive people. Jeez, why is that so difficult for some of these vampires? I know it's an awkward conversation to have, but it's better than her finding out from somebody else and then becoming terrified. By far the greatest red flag, in my opinion though, was the reason Stefan became obsessed with Elena in the first place, the initial spark of attraction for him that started their love story. When Stefan saved Elena from drowning in the river, the first thing he noticed is that she shares an uncanny resemblance to his ex, Catherine. Like, they look exactly the same, played by the same actress and everything. Stefan wanted to know if Elena was Catherine in disguise or in some way related to her, but the more he watched her, creepy that he did that too, by the way, the more he realized she was nothing like Catherine. Stefan then decided he wanted to know Elena, and he inserted himself into her life, posing as a new high school student. Naturally, when Elena finds out that he approached her because she looks like his ex, she feels betrayed. She nearly leaves him over this, and understandably so. In Elena's perspective, Stefan was only attracted to her because she looks like Catherine. However, they do talk about it later, and Stefan explains what happened. He assures Elena that his love for her has nothing to do with Catherine, and they're not anything alike, except for the way they look. This assuages Elena's fears, and they stay together.
Except, no, he's wrong. This relationship doesn't have nothing to do with Catherine. It has everything to do with Catherine. It would not exist without her. Stefan would not have become attracted to Elena without her.
If she wasn't a 17-year-old girl who didn't know much about the world, she probably would have stayed gone when she broke up with him. This foundation for a relationship is shaky at best and straight up creepy at worst. But honestly, I could forgive all that. Lord knows I made enough excuses for Edward in his section, so I should give Stefan the same courtesy. At the end of the day, Stefan loved Elena, respected her boundaries, and wanted the best for her. Even if she told him to go, that she didn't want him in her life anymore, he would listen. Stefan's love was true. It was based on genuine care for Elena, wanting her to be safe and happy.
I cannot say the same for Damon.
Damon. Oh, Damon. I have an entire video on him. If it's not out already, it will be soon. If Damon was not played by the charismatic Ian Somerhalder, he would be the most hated character in fiction. Full stop. He'd be right up there with Jacob. Maybe even worse. Honestly, the fact Elena ended up with Damon instead of Stefan is criminal. You can tell the writers did not originally plan for them to be together, because their pairing is riddled with plot holes and contradictions. Like with Twilight, the story of the Vampire Diaries was not planned to be a love triangle. Edward was supposed to be with Bella, and Elena was supposed to be with Stefan. Jacob was only meant to be Bella's childhood friend, and Damon was supposed to be the villain of the Vampire Diaries. Elena ending up with Damon is like Bella choosing Jacob post-kissing scene. Yeah, the one that she didn't want. Except it's worse because Damon did more than try to force Elena to kiss him. Damon coerced Elena's best friend Caroline into a relationship and nearly unalived her, caused the death of her other best friend Bonnie's grandma in an attempt to free Catherine from a tomb, and unalived Elena's brother. Her brother! Jeremy was straight up dead, and the only reason he came back to life was because he had a magical ring that Damon did not know he was wearing. Damon also forced himself into Elena's house multiple times, to her dismay, and, like Stefan, watched her sleep. But unlike Stefan, he did it multiple times.
Geez, what's with these vampires and watching teenage girls sleep? Get a life! Don't you need to, I don't know, hunt at night? Watching someone sleep is boring, or is that just me? Is there some entertainment value to watching people sleep that I'm missing?
All joking aside though, Damon was bad for Elena. He even says it several times himself, but the writers forced them together anyway. To make things worse, Damon continues doing bad things even after getting with Elena. If you'd like to know the details of that, watch my Damon video. But, even worse, Damon also dated Catherine. He and his brother were with her at the same time, and at the start of the show, he's still not over her. Unlike Stefan, who is doing everything he can to move on from Catherine, Damon wants to get back together with her. Then when Catherine rejects him, that's when Damon starts falling for Elena. Whatever problems Elena and Stefan had, it is 10 times worse with Damon. I doubt this was the writer's intention. They clearly meant for Damon to fall for Elena for who she is and get over Catherine like Stefan did, but it really doesn't come across that way. Also, Elena and Damon's age gap is a lot creepier than she and Stefan. At the very least, there is the feeble excuse that Stefan is a teenager trapped in an immortal's body, frozen at 17, which is the same age as Elena. However, Damon is frozen at 25 years old, and he falls for Elena while she's still a minor. Honestly, I don't know what else to say. This is a mess, guys. It's fun to watch. The actors sell it well, don't get me wrong, but writing-wise, it's a total disaster.
And that, in a nutshell, is the Vampire Diaries love triangle. What a poorly thought out travesty. I understand what the writers were going for, but they just did not commit to that redemption arc for Damon. Even when he was with Elena, their relationship was awful. It makes no sense that she picked him. I mean, Stefan wasn't amazing either. We talked about his flaws at length too, but their love story at least made sense. Enough of that though. We have more than enough information to compare these two triangles. So I'm going to stop procrastinating. I'm gonna be frank with you guys, this is the hardest comparison I have ever done. And honestly, I am nervous for this next section. As I was writing the script, I thought that, as with my other comparison videos, the worst love triangle would become obvious once I have presented, all of the evidence.
However, the deeper I got into this video, the more confused I became. These love stories are both so bad, but they're bad in different ways. My gut reaction was to crown the Vampire Diaries as the worst one because Damon is terrible and Elena should not have picked him, but then I took into account that Jacob imprinted on Bella's baby, and I became even more conflicted. How can I rate Twilight higher than the Vampire Diaries with a plot that creepy? I mean, come on, Damon's relationship with Elena was bad, but at least she wasn't a baby when he fell in love with her.
Oh god. Oh god. The bar's in hell. The bar is so deep in hell that I cannot find my way out. I wouldn't choose any of these men in a million years, and no matter which love triangle I pick as the less bad one, some of you guys are going to be mad at me. These triangles are so controversial.
No matter which way you slice it, both of these sets of relationships deserve to be called the worst love triangle. I cannot in good conscience tell you guys that one is objectively better than the other because it's so much more complicated than that. However, I can tell you which one is worse in two different categories, because again, they're both bad in different ways. So let's just do that. Category 1, romantic choices. In terms of romantic options, that is, the two men our female love interest had to choose between, Twilight is our winner. In my opinion, Edward actually communicates with Bella better than Stefan and Elena, and Edward didn't keep any major secrets from her, except that serial unaliver thing he tells her when they're married, but Stefan also kept a secret like that, and his is so much worse. Now, I did mention that Stefan was better than Edward in the beginning, but note that key word, beginning. Stefan got worse over time, and that's why Edward is winning here. Meanwhile, Jacob, and keep in mind guys, this bar is very low, unlike Damon, Jacob is not a mass unaliver. He's just a creepy kid with a crush on a girl. Yes, he does imprint on Bella's baby, but if you watch my Jacob video, you'd know that Jacob technically didn't have a choice in that. The imprinting system forces a werewolf to fall in love with whoever they have that magical connection with. It's for those reasons that, in this category, the Vampire Diaries is the worst love triangle. Category 2, entertainment value. Our second category is entertainment value. That refers to the characters' relationships and backstories being well developed, and the characters having winning chemistry on screen. In my opinion, the crown for this clearly goes to the Vampire Diaries. Stefan, Damon, and Elena's backstories are much more well developed than Edward, Jacob, and Bella's, even when we take the Twilight books into account. I'll give it to the books. Edward's backstory is pretty well written, but Jacob's is severely lacking, and Bella's is way too general for a main character. Meanwhile, our Vampire Diaries love triangle explores all of its characters in excruciating detail. We know everything there is to know about them, and their chemistry makes the bad writing digestible. Especially the chemistry between Stefan and Damon and Elena. I'm not quite as fond of Elena and Stefan. I feel like their actors didn't really click. So while I know that Edward and Jacob are better choices romantically, I would rather rewatch the Vampire Diaries than Twilight. There's just so much more substance to the Vampire Diaries love triangle. Not to mention, this love triangle was more of a, triangle than Twilight. At one point, Elena did realize she had feelings for both men, and she had to make a difficult choice between them. Despite all the problems, that was an exciting moment. That's why, in this category, Twilight is the worst love triangle.
And with that, we finally get to the end of this video. Wow, this is the longest video I've ever made. At least at the time of posting this. Yes, it's definitely quite the challenge comparing two love triangles from totally different yet similar-ish franchises. Someone had to do it though. Again, thank you so much for 5,000 subscribers. I'm so excited that we made it this far. Let me know what you want me to do when we reach 10K. That's the next big milestone in my opinion. In the meantime, I hope I've inspired you, and I'll see you in the next video.
NaNoWriMo, or National Novel Writing Month, is going great, and my next book is in the works. I know how much you guys love vampires, so I'll be pushing this one out as fast as possible. I'll keep you posted on it.